A Tale of Two Seeds by Kent Reinker. Once upon a time, two seeds were carried across the ocean, nurtured in the hearts of men. They were planted in a garden. The seeds grew into trees with branches. The two seeds in question are, of course, Bethel Seaman's Chapel and Fort Street Church, the two edifices that eventually joined to become Central Union Church. Bethel Seaman's Chapel was built under the supervision of Reverend John Deal, opening on November 28, 1833. Its mandate initially was to care for the spiritual needs of seafarers. Only later was that extended to the population of Honolulu. Oahu Bethel Church, a separate entity, was founded by parishioners in 1837 and served the Honolulu community. Ministers at Bethel Church included Reverend John Deal, Reverend Reuben Tinker, Reverend Samuel Chineri Damon, and Reverend Engelbert Christian Ogle. Reverend Damon served the church for 40 years, and his descendants founded First Hawaiian Bank and Moanalua Gardens. Fort Street Church was chartered on May 30, 1853, with Reverend Townsend Elijah Taylor as its first pastor. It first met in temporary quarters and was known as the Second Foreign Church. The first name, however, the Second Foreign Church, never really caught on, and when a permanent church was built in 1856, the name was officially changed to the Fort Street Church. Ministers at the Fort Street Church included Reverend Townsend Elijah Taylor, Reverend Joseph D. Strong, Reverend Eli Corwin, Reverend Walter Freer, and Reverend John Alexander Cruzan. The trees thrived and bore fruit. The Anglican Episcopal Church first met in Bethel Chapel in 1840 and was not organized as a separate entity until 1862. A mission to Micronesia began in 1852 and was followed by a mission to the Marquesas in 1853. And then a local Chinese mission in 1876 subsequently matured to become the First Chinese Church of Christ. The Bethel Chapel newspaper, The Friend, was published from 1843 to 1954 and became the oldest newspaper in the Pacific. It was reorganized in 1954 to become the official publication of the Hawaii Conference of the UCC, so one could say that it actually continues to this day. Methodist Church first met in Bethel Chapel in 1856. It is the predecessor of First Methodist Church. Fort Street Church also bore fruit. The Fort Street English Day School was a forerunner of McKinley High School and first met in the Fort Street Church basement. Kaiulani Elementary also had its origins in the Fort Street Church. The two trees grew so close together and intertwined so much that they eventually merged to become one single tree. The inciting event for the merger of the two churches was the fire that destroyed Bethel Church in 1886. Following the fire, the congregation of Bethel Church voted to unite with Fort Street Church. The congregation of Fort Street Church concurred with this, and both congregations then voted on a name for the new church, and the most popular name was Central Union Church. On November 13, 1887, 72 Bethel Church members joined with 250 Fort Street Church members, 13 members of other churches, and 2 new members, making a total of 337 members to form Central Union Church. Initial services were held in the Fort Street Church. Attendance at church services of over 300 people stressed the Fort Street Church. Therefore, a new, larger facility was built at the corner of Beretania and Richard Streets. The cornerstone was laid on June 3, 1891, and the first service was held on December 3, 1892. Central Union Church at the Richards location proved to be very fruitful as well. The lay members formed a school for Portuguese children, which ultimately became the Portuguese Evangelical Church at the corner of Punchbowl and Miller Streets. The name of that church was changed to Pilgrim Church in 1928. Members of Pilgrim Church initiated, among other things, the first Punchbowl sunrise service. Pilgrim Church reunited with Central Union in 1940, hence our present Pilgrim Chapel. Central Union began a mission for Japanese contract workers in 1885. As part of this, they brought lay preacher Taiko Shimizu to Honolulu to teach. Initial classes began in the YMCA, and a Sunday school met in the Lyceum building in Nu'uanu. This eventually matured to become Nu'uanu Congregational Church. Central Union began other classes for Japanese immigrants in 1889 in Makiki. This mission matured to become Makiki Christian Church, now on Pensacola Street. In 1896, Central Union members Mr. and Mrs. P.C. Jones built a new chapel in Palama and presented it to Central Union Church. In subsequent years, Palama became an overpopulated slum, particularly following a Chinatown fire in 1900. Tremendous social needs were present, and eventually the religious aspect of the Palama Chapel were dropped, and it became a pure social organization now known as Palama Settlement. After the destruction of Bethel Church, there was no remaining ministry for seamen in Honolulu. Central Union member C.V. Sturdivant felt that the Salvation Army might be able to help. He canvassed friends for donation, resulting in enough funds for them to bring 6 Salvation Army workers who arrived from California in 1894. Central Union Church, Kapili Church, and others provided continuing support for many years for the Salvation Army until it became financially independent. CUC built a chapel and settlement house in Kalihi in 1908. This eventually became the Kalihi branch of Central Union Church. It then eventually became independent and is now known as Kalihi Union Church on King Street. Ministers at the Fort Street and Richards and Beretania Central Union Church included Reverend Edward Griffin Beckwith, Reverend Douglas Putnam Birney, Reverend William Morris Kincaid, Reverend J. Walter Sylvester, and Reverend Doremus Scudder. The Richards Central Union Church became overcrowded as church membership rose to over 1,000 members. Reverend Albert Palmer, who was then pastor of the Central Union, felt a larger facility was essential for continuing the church's mission. At that point, Woodlawn, which was part of the Dillingham estate, became available, and a cornerstone for the new Central Union Church was laid in 1922. Ministers at the Central Union Beretania location have included Reverend Albert Wentworth Palmer, Reverend Philip Allen Swartz, Reverend Horace W. Levitt, Reverend Alan Hackett, Reverend Thomas Leroy Crosby, Reverend Kenneth Orson Ruick, Reverend Robert Hero Midgley, Reverend Edward Merritt Robinson, Reverend Lawrence Corbett, and our present minister, Reverend David Rivers. Central Union in its present location has been particularly fruitful. In 1928, a kindergarten was formed, which subsequently began Central Union Preschool, which is now in its 89th year. In 1934, the Central Union Women's League took full responsibility for a former Manoa mission of Kauai Hau Church. The Manoa mission became an independent church in 1946 and is now known as Manoa Valley Church. Central Union Windward members wanted a CUC-affiliated church nearer to where they lived. In response to this, Central Union Windward Church was dedicated in 1956. It became independent in 1963 and is now the Windward United Church of Christ. The Hawaii School for Girls began at Central Union, meeting in the parish hall in 1964. It stayed there for 5 years before moving to its present facilities at La Pietra in 1969. After Mary Dillingham Freer willed her Arcadia estate to Central Union, Dillingham Corporation joined Central Union in a joint venture to provide a retirement facility on her estate. Construction of the Arcadia Retirement Center began in 1965. The Hawaiian Korean Central Church met in Atherton Chapel for many years before moving to its present facility in Manoa. The Honolulu Boy Choir was formed by Roy and Niall Hallman in 1974. This provided discipline and music for boys for over 40 years before disbanding recently. 7 churches, including Central Union, joined in bringing Meals on Wheels to Hawaii. Habitat for Humanity came to Hawaii when Central Union sponsored Rosalind Carter to come introduce it. For seeds to grow into beautiful trees, the proper nutrients are required at exactly the right time. As the song so rightly tells us, the church is not a building, the church is not a steeple, the church is not a resting place, the church is the people. I'll give you 5 examples, 3 who rooted locally and 2 who rooted elsewhere. This picture shows Susie White with her parents in 1997. She is now Susie Schulberg Church Council Chair and Arcadia CEO. This picture shows Cerise Asuncion and her family in 1997. Cerise has gone on to be one of our most active members, including chairing the preschool committee in the past. This photograph shows ex-football player and disc jockey George Scott with Central Union Church Youth in 1997. With the aid of a Deacon's Theological Scholarship, Reverend Scott was able to go to Chicago Theological Seminary and is now Reverend Dr. George Scott, Punahou Chaplain and Central Union Church Youth Minister. This photograph was taken on Sunday during his wonderful sermon. The Deacon's Theological Scholarships are an excellent example of the perfect nutrient at the right time. Many Central Union ministers have benefited from them. Another example of providing just the right nutrient at the right time is our youth spring trips. In 1993, 17 youth and 4 escorts journeyed to the Cheyenne River Lakota Sioux Reservation. 3 youth subsequently chose to attend the University of South Dakota. One wrote a prize-winning essay about the experience published in the Honolulu Star Bulletin. The experience dramatically changed the life for one. Stephen DeGioia was one of the 3 who chose to go to the University of South Dakota afterwards. Here he is in 1997. Steve then met and married a Lakota woman. He has since been very involved with Native American issues and has gone back for a master's degree in Native American issues and is an adjunct professor at Black Hills University. This photograph shows Central Union Church Youth Group member Sean Kajiwara discussing experimental techniques to minimize irrigation. Sean is now vineyard manager for Kendall Jackson Wines, and a recent New York Times story outlined his plans for a novel water conservation system at the vineyard. These are the seeds of Central Union's future, hopefully receiving the right nutrition for them to become beautiful trees.